Historically, cannabis has been one of these things that you don't want to touch as a politician because it was perceived to be divisive. The reality in the United States at this point is that it's one of the few topics that most people across all parties agree should happen.
And we'll say hello and welcome to a special report from the Lobster Pot. Recent developments in the US have really sort of started to change the conversation around legalization of cannabis on a federal level. I'm here, my colleague Jamie's here. We're British. We don't understand it. We do it a bit, but for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to bring someone who knows all about it and has an interesting take and can fill in the gaps whilst we ask the idiotic questions around what exactly does this mean. Mr. Chris Day from the GCNC, Global Cannabis Networks Collective, and GPS, Gateway Proven Strategies. Did I get that right? I know.
It's pretty early in the morning on a Monday for me to get those acronyms right. So kudos.
Well, thank you. I haven't been practicing or anything, but there we go. But Chris, tell us what has happened in the US last week. I think it was Thursday. President Biden came out and said what exactly about cannabis?
Well, it's kind of the art of reading between the lines, right? So on the surface, he made a big statement about pardoning people in federal prison with simple possession infractions. And the truth there is that's not really anybody. I mean, there's a very small group of people that have this, but most of the folks that are sitting in federal prison around cannabis, it's more complex than just simple possession. So really what he's doing, and I think what matters, look, all of this matters to people that are sitting in prison that really should get out. And if you go look, for example, online at the commentary from Last Prisoner Project, you can get really deep into the weeds on the nuance of what all of that means. But I think the key takeaway here is that President Biden is making these comments around pardons. He's making these comments around rescheduling or descheduling cannabis for a reason, and that is he wants Democrats to win the election in November. And historically, cannabis has been one of these things that you don't want to touch as a politician because it was perceived to be divisive. The reality in the United States at this point is that it's one of the few topics that most people across all parties agree should happen. Now, that doesn't mean all people. You will find plenty of folks who are detractors, but most people. And so elections in the United States are won in the middle, not on the fringes. We've got the extremists. They're always going to vote one way or the other based on
those that could be swayed, essentially. Those who could be swayed.
In the center, right? Mm-hmm. So now cannabis has become that issue that they feel can sway the center to vote in one direction or another. To me, that is what ultimately really matters and what gives me hope that sooner than later, we actually will see a descheduling or a rescheduling of cannabis in the United States, which has been the big topic, right? There's been banking and there's been the scheduling of it and what that means. So that's really the note is it's a sea change that a sitting president, not one who's just vying for office, a sitting president would make these statements and directives. It's not actually the substance of what he's done, because the substance of what he's done is not very much. It's the directional and the indicating lights that matter.
Like you say, reading between the lines, it seems to make a lot more sense. I mean, like you say, but just to clarify a couple of things in terms of federal prison versus, I guess, state or local prison.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's more serious for more serious crimes typically, but is that the kind of thing? So it's not just like, oh, I got busted when I was 18 for an eighth or something like that. We're talking about those sort of crimes can be forgiven, but those sort of people aren't going to be in a federal prison necessarily for that sort of misdemeanor, correct?
That's also true. And out of his 3 points, right? We've talked about the federal pardons.
Mm-hmm.
The second point was encouraging state governors to do the same, right? And then the third was the evaluation of where on the schedule cannabis sits. So encouraging state governors to do the same is really interesting, because we have now a vast majority of states in the US who have, in some form or fashion, a legalized program. The ones that are sort of still not jumping on, the largest being the state of Texas. And of course, the current governor of Texas came out within 24 hours of President Biden saying, not a chance in hell we're going to do this, which, if you're in the state of Texas and watching this, please vote. And because you can change the future of that state really in a matter of months, if as voters in that state you choose to. That is where there are a lot of people that have serious issues in terms of state prisons and infractions there that also need to be given up. And without a federal legalization program in place to override these states, there'll be a whole lot of debate still ongoing. And that's, again, where the battle will be fought, with some in particular, Texas being the largest.
Do you think that if, it's not a good election campaign and, the result Biden is vying for happens, do you think it will be much more of a dent than perhaps if he hadn't have done it? In terms of, from the cannabis industry's perspective, is it a bit of a gamble?
It's a bit of a gamble, but it's a politically safe gamble, right? He wouldn't have done it if there was a big risk. So if they win, great. We know that they won and they can push it through. It's likely they'll push something of some sort through in the lame duck session. Not guaranteed by any means, but it's laying that stage very much to move forward. And if they lose, and for whatever reason the Republicans take over and choose not to do something, it forces the Republican hands also, because the majority of Republicans are not against legalization. Some on the extremes are, but this is not really a party line issue. And so I do think it lays the framework for either the Republicans to take it over and push something through, or the Democrats to do something. And the way in which that is spun will change drastically depending on which party is in charge. But from just a pure industry perspective, it sets the table for movement in a way that when we talked last and I said, who knows when legalization will happen, it really does change that discussion and provide some energy and impetus to the North American market that we've been looking for and haven't had in a number of years.
Sorry, Jamie. You saying?
And also further afield. A lot of people follow America. So, anything that you guys do is impactful elsewhere, and therefore all the hype in lots of different parts of Europe and further afield. We were talking about other countries just before we started recording. All of them are affected by big countries making big changes. So it's, the ripples are pretty large.
Yeah, for good or ill, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. And I think the globe understands the consumption rates and the product innovation opportunities and all of that if the United States can get on board and participate. Even if it takes a while, if it seems directionally that's happening, the challenges we've talked about previously in capital markets start to loosen up because people will see that there's an opportunity there instead of a risk. It very fundamentally changes the economics as well.
And I think it's from a cultural perspective as well. If there's, the president is making the right, even, are they baby steps? Do you feel like, is it quite significant? That's the bit we can't get over here to really understand, if it was purely, obviously, yeah, there's a political play there somewhere. I'm not, I know nothing about politics, but if he really wanted to make it happen, surely he could just say, right, executive order, cannabis is now federally legal, and that would be like, yay. Is that an irresponsible way of doing it?
Well, an executive order doesn't really solve the problem because, I mean, it does in the very short term, and it would be a good thing, I think, because it would force the hand of the legislators. But Biden also is in a tough spot. I have no sympathy for him. He created many of the problems. I mean, he was part of creating the problems that now he is claiming to try to fix. So, political opportunism for sure in what he's doing. And to answer your question about is this baby steps or large, Gateway Proven Strategies put out an opinion piece over the weekend on this that basically said this is good news, kind of, right? And it was very much this is baby steps in a practical sense, but in an attitudinal sense. And this is my opinion, but where it differs somewhat from the naysayers is it's huge from a attitudinal sense within the country to have a sitting president come out and make the statements that Biden made and challenge not only the Department of Justice and the legislators, but also the state governors to push this forward. That is huge, and that starts to change the dynamic of the finances and the investors and the way in which states and elections happen. So depends on the calculus, but having spent a lot of time in public affairs, this is a big deal. It's a very big deal.
I think as well, if you compare it to different, well, not even different political structures, wherever you are in our country and yours, or wherever you are on the planet, a lot of times what happens at a political level is if a government wants to float something, they don't send the leader out. They send, a senior minister or someone of some clout or note to send it out, put it out there and see how it's responded to. We have a similar thing in the UK at the moment where, there's noises of rescheduling cannabis to the other way. So going to Class A, and that it's not, it's not the prime minister who's doing that. It's a reasonably senior minister to see how well it goes down before it gets absorbed and communicated from on high. And I think that's probably the key thing. It's the person making the statement that's maybe the most critical part.
Yeah. And we've all been waiting for this for a long time, right? And I think you could literally have had any of the last three presidents prior to President Biden have made similar statements, but the political will within the party structure wasn't there to make that happen. So what this indicates is that the political will is there. In order for the president to come out and say that now, just before a midterm election that is highly contested, means that they don't think it's a position that's going to be easily attacked by the opposing party either, which is accurate, and why we have speculated that perhaps a commentary like what he put out last week would occur to help try to sway the vote. You really do have to read the tea leaves a little bit and understand political dynamics. And there's advisors and PR people and public affairs folks like me sitting in the back rooms going, hey, you should maybe word it this way or do it that way. And it results in these kinds of movements. If you're just a business person on the ground in California, you can look at that and go, he's just spouting BS again. Truth is, yes, but it's BS that is likely to move markets, and that's what we need.
Very cool. Any other comments on that? It doesn't bring us closer to kind of federal legalization per se, but like you say, the significance of who it is, the context, and, the fact that change is possible, it's all pointing towards that. Is there anything else that you feel like needs to happen? What would be a good thing to happen next?
Well, the best thing to happen would be for this to at least, whether it lets the Democrats win or directionally is measured favorably, it does force a review of the scheduling. which means a decision at some point has to be made by somebody, and the parties are going to have to either accept it or decline it. I think if you continue to push in that direction, there will be some very vocal opposition, but in the end, there's not too many folks that are going to see this as a winning thing to oppose once it comes in. Then the question is descheduled to what, right? To what level? But at least we will be moving in the right direction. And a lot of my colleagues here in the U.S. have a whole lot of opinions on what that should be and what that should look like. I'm going to not go out on a limb and make all of those public here from my perspective, but I do think that directionally this is significant. It shouldn't be just washed under the rug as another day of political grandstanding. And now what we really need to do is put the pressure on to make that review of the scheduling happen as quickly as possible, which in Washington terms is a while, but it changes that timeline from 5 to 7 years to maybe 1 to 3, right? Which they're going to want to get this done if they can before the next presidential cycle. That's 2 years away.
Very cool. Very good. Excellent. No, I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for coming on and clarifying all of that. And it's positive from my perspective, and I hope that UK lawmakers are paying attention, as I'm sure they are. And rather than going one way, we go towards a more decriminalization, descheduling route, as you guys seem to be. So yeah.
Yeah, it's clear as mud, but the mud is slightly less thick.
Yes, absolutely. I'll take that. Cool. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Great talking to you.